guys. If you're visiting, you're wondering why the church just freaked out. My name is Sean, and with my wife Tegan, we are heading to Samoa 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. And I just want to say, first of all, a big thank you for the church in general. We almost were here for a year. Almost. I think we flew here November 17th or around that time, and we're 3 weeks short of that, but Joe's like, send out the Valenzuelas. But no, I just really want to say thank you. Over the past near year, this place has 100% been a home. We've been super grateful for not how you just welcomed us, little baby Eli. He's extremely loved by all of you, and this is definitely always going to be a place that has our heart. I sent out the lesson earlier today or last night. If you're visiting with us and you would like to receive that, just nudge the person to your left or to your right. They can forward that on to you as we send it out so it's easier to follow along, and you can go confirm your convictions in the Bible as well. But if you're turning around in the Bible and you have the Bible in front of you, we're mostly going to be in 2 Kings 19. We'll jump around between there. As a church, we've been going through the miracles in the Bible, and we're coming across another miracle here that gives us a bit of perspective of how we can get miracles in our lives. See, when it comes to miracles, particularly in a church, it's quite easy to blame or praise people depending on how many miracles there are or are not. We look at a situation and we see miracles and we go, okay, who can I accredit this to? Or we see something not going that well and we want to blame something or somebody. You know, there's a few things that matter when it comes to a miracle. The whole book of Kings actually teaches us that a nation rises and falls depending on its leadership. Miracles are depending on leaders. Guess what? Leaders don't like hearing that. But it's 100% true. Hebrews 13, verse 17. Have confidence in your leaders and submit to their authority, because they keep watch over you as those who must give an account. Do this so that the work will be a joy, not a burden, for this would be of no credit to you. Talks about leaders here when it comes to miracles and making miracles. They are the ones that have to give an account to God. They have a responsibility directly given to them by God. And it's even one of those things that God actually allows bad leadership into certain places in certain churches as a discipline for them. Isaiah 3:4, it says, I will make mere use their officials. Children will roll over them. Talking about one of God's punishment on his people is bad leadership. It's pretty crazy. The broader message of the book of Isaiah actually emphasizes on the importance of righteous leadership. Well, what does that mean for the common man or woman in a church? Well, we also must be reminded that a leader is nothing without the followers. Right? Hebrews 13:17 even just talks about, hey, you have to submit to their authority so that their job, their responsibility will be a joy, not a burden to them. We must be reminded that leaders are nothing without the followers. Many prophets of God actually prove this exact point. They were powerful in word and action and deed, but yet nothing happened because people did not follow their word. People didn't follow their warning. See, leaders, they have actually zero power, but have authority. That's why it says don't submit to their power, submit to their authority. What do I mean by that? If there's a car driving down the road, I don't have physical power to stop that car. But if I was a police officer, I have the authority to pull it over. Very, very different things. In a church, leaders only have as much power as you give them authority. Right? If you see a leader trying to use their authority where you don't give it to them, they get steamrolled. They get hit by the car, and ministry feels very difficult. In the same way, it is up to the followers as well. See, when it comes to this, we look at the leaders, we look at the followers, and we can still ask ourselves, well, where do the miracles come from? Depending on where you are, you're hoping that it's the opposite. Meaning, when I was first coming here on a mission team to Sydney, I was a little bit of a nobody in one sense or another in the group of 12 that we had here. when I was coming, my faith was actually really on the group that surrounded me, my leaders that were around me. I had Joe and Carrie. I was the youngest there. Had my older brother who converted me. I had Pete who balled us up back in LA, and I was like, man, this guy's awesome. I had these other two amazing leaders, Mason and Jason. And so I came really with my faith on these guys that are around me. I'm like, man, this is going to be easy. This is awesome. But then the two leaders left, and then I was called into leadership, and then my perspective changed. I was like, man, my group better work hard. I was like, it's not dependent on the leaders anymore, guys. It's all what you do, you know? And it's funny. It's like when you're a leader, you wish it depends on the group. When you're a follower, you wish everything depends on the leader. But today we're going to be looking at how the miracle of this angel of the Lord destroyed the army of Assyria, and mainly because this great miracle depended on one person. That's all that mattered. There are many miracles that as a church we get to celebrate and accept, but usually these miracles depended on one person. We love having Sherry in the church. She is awesome. She is amazing. Every single one of us says she's a miracle from God. That miracle depended on her brother. You know, Jordan's awesome, leading the North and everything. That miracle depended on his sister, JT, having faith for a long time. To be honest, myself, leading here, my miracle depended on Eric keep inviting his little young brother out to church. It's that, where we can look at everybody else waiting for the miracle to happen. Guess what? The miracle depends on you. My title of my lesson this morning is The Miracle Depends on Your Prayer Life. We're going to be looking at this story of how this miracle came to be and really just honing in on the idea of miracles come depending on your prayer life with God. We're going to be turning in 2 Kings chapter 19. First, we need to understand a little bit as we run into this story. There's a lot going on as we jump straight into it. So I want to give you a little bit of basis what's going on here. The king of Assyria, which is kind of like the Assyrian empire that's starting to build right here, his name is Sennacherib. He sends King Hezekiah, who's the king of Judah at the moment, a threatening letter boasting about all the victories that he had over all the nations and warning them that his impeding victory and invasion over Judah. And I put a little map there for you just to understand which situation that King Hezekiah is facing right here. As you can see on the map, there's that big old green area. That's the Assyrian. That little brown area, that's King Hezekiah. And so this threatening letter that Hezekiah is receiving is not with empty boasts or threats. 100% he's been coming closer and closer day in, day out to the walls of Jerusalem right here. All of the northern kingdom, Israel, had already been destroyed, and now it was Hezekiah's turn to face this judgment as well. And so when he receives this in verse 1, he humbles himself before the Lord and asks for guidance. He goes and talks to the prophet Isaiah and says, "What shall we do?" In response, God buys King Hezekiah a little bit of time by confusing the Syrian army, but they 100% return later on throughout the chapter in verse 9 through 13. And so he sends another letter, kind of the same idea. Like, hey, don't start having false faith in this God. I've destroyed this God. I've destroyed this nation. It doesn't matter. I am coming. And so we're going to see King Hezekiah's response to this letter. Verse 14 through 19. Hezekiah received the letter from the messenger and read it. Then he went up to the temple of the Lord and spread it out before the Lord. And Hezekiah prayed to the Lord, "Lord, the God of Israel, enthroned between the cherubim, you alone are God over all the nations of earth. You have made heaven and earth. Give ear, Lord, and hear. Open your eyes, Lord, and see. Listen to the words of cherubim has sent to ridicule the living God. It is true, Lord, that the Assyrian kings have laid waste these nations and their lands. They have thrown their gods into the fire and destroyed them. For they were not gods, but only wood and stone, fashioned by human hands. Now, Lord our God, deliver us from his hand, so that all the kingdoms on earth, of the earth may know that you alone, God, Lord our God." To be honest, when I first read this, I was a bit surprised that King Hezekiah's first words aren't, "What is going on? Red alert, things are happening, code red, let's go, God. Instead, when you read throughout this prayer, he's completely focused on God. Complete and utterly focused on God. As you read through it, I want you to try and count how many times Hezekiah prays about himself. 0. Kind of uses the word us, but he's really talking about the nation more than himself. 0 times he talks about himself in this situation. I thought, man, that's a good challenge. Try praying for 30 minutes without ever using the word I or you. I actually tried a little bit this morning, and I was like, okay, God, I'm going to get completely focused on you. Like, dear God, I think you're so beautiful. I was like, dang it, already. Yeah. Even in me trying to focus on God, I still messed up. And I was like, trying just not to focus on self, but just God. And after this, God recognized it. 2 Kings 19, verse 20, now I'm using the New American Standard Version here. It says, then Isaiah, son of Amoz, sent word to Hezekiah saying, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel says. Because you have prayed to me about Sennacherib, king of Assyria, I have heard you. What I love about this is that God intervened simply because King Hezekiah prayed. And King Hezekiah was just going like, I understand that it has nothing to do with me. It's just you, God. I'm just praying to you. But God wanted the king to know that his involvement was simply because the king prayed. I really love the power of prayer. It's awesome. There are sometimes things are going well in my life, not because I've done anything great, it's because I have people praying around me. How awesome is that? To be a part of a church where we're praying for each other and helping each other. And it's good that sometimes you get credit for something you didn't even do. I remember there was this one time, now this was years ago, we usually, every single time that there's someone visiting us or coming from a sister church, that we welcome them at the airport. And we like to get a big crowd there, sing songs for them, and welcome them through. And Joe and Carrie were gone for a while, and so they returned, but somebody else was returning in the airport that next day. And so he didn't really have the opportunity to kind of organize things, and we all just arrived there the next day, and thank God there's a big group of disciples, and Joe comes up to Tegan and myself and says, man, great job for getting everybody here, super organized, people are on time. I turned to Tegan, I'm like, I didn't even know that was my responsibility. And Tegan's like, just, take what you can get. I think this is the first time him hearing that, but I was like, I didn't even know. I was like, yeah, let's just accept it, and prayer can be like that sometimes. Prayer has the power to get God involved in your life when you don't even know what's going on. I don't know about you, but sometimes I can wonder about the prayer of God. Has God already made a ruling on this issue, or can I talk to him? Can I talk through it with him? How much power or say do I have in a certain situation? I wonder if that same thing was going through King Hezekiah's mind as well. Why? Because not too long ago, God is actually understood, and he was totally sovereign of Israel getting destroyed and the Syrian Empire coming closer and closer to Jerusalem. A few chapters before, he actually showed King Hezekiah and everybody in Israel of why this was happening. First, they had adultery and apostasy. They were turning away from God. 2 Kings 17, 7 through 12. That they turned away from God and started worshiping other gods. They had many prophets warning. That's 2 Kings 17, 13 and 14. God sent many prophets and said, hey, I see what you're doing. You need to repent. They continue to rebel. And by the end, verse 18 through 20 in chapter 17, he says, I'm so angry. I'm judging this nation. I'm sending the Syrians to destroy it. King Hezekiah knew all this. He knew all this, and yet he still went and prayed to God. What happened after that? Verse 35 of 2 Kings 19. That night, the angel of the Lord went out and put to death 185,000 in this Syrian camp. When the people got up the next morning, they were all dead bodies. It's crazy that God already made a ruling. He already said this nation needs to get destroyed. Yet because of one man's prayer, it changed everything. He just humbled himself, got before God, and prayed. There would have still been people in sin in Jerusalem at that time. On that day, they would have been worshiping other gods that day. Maybe they would have thanked thanked other gods for what God did. But guess what? God didn't mind all those different things. He was simply answering the prayer of a righteous man. Isaiah, they accepted this. They understood why they were being judged, right? All of Israel, all of Jerusalem, they knew what was happening. Yet God in his grace answered this prayer. It's funny. Half of the times problems arise in our life, whose fault is it? It's usually your own. Right? You know why you're here. You know what happened. You know what you said and what you did. And still, God still rescues you. It's quite funny. Half the time, brothers get up here and they talk through benevolence or contribution, and they give some random story about how God saved them. Half the time, the leaders in the church are looking at each other like, man, that was their fault. This wasn't like divine testing. They didn't pay their rent. If 100%, I was about to karate chop a brother in the neck if they talked about the West Brothers household closing up one more time. I was like, if I hear this one more time, that was sin. It had nothing to do with God's grace. It's that. But what I love about hearing those stories, regardless if it was our fault, God continued to rescue them. Right? Regardless of whose fault it was, God rescued. And aren't we thankful for that? Simply because of prayers. And God going, I know it's their fault. I know what's happening. But you pray and I will change my mind. But we have to pay attention to this prayer because it doesn't say, because you prayed, full stop. He gives us a little bit of ideas of why this prayer specifically changed God's mind. The first thing he says is because you prayed to me. You came and prayed to me. Sometimes when we're praying, we're more talking to ourselves than talking to God. Our prayers we're talking out loud, and then by the end of it, we're like, okay, our prayers are like therapy sessions where we're realizing what we need to change, or we create a to-do list. Have you ever done that where you're praying, you're like, oh, that's a good idea, actually. I should do that later, right? And I know I've done that where I pray through a sermon. I'm like, man, that's awesome, God. Let me write that down. Sometimes we're just praying to ourselves. We're not actually praying to God. See, King Hezekiah got God's attention because he didn't talk about himself at all. He said, God, this is who you are. This is a challenge that we're going through, but I know how you rescue. God, if you give ear and if you want to, go for it. But God, I'm talking to you. See, prayer is not a therapy session to give us a to-do list or a prep talk. I got to get ready for the day. No, it's talking to God. Matthew 11, verse 28, come to me, all who are weary and burdened, I will give you rest. You know why you don't feel rest after your prayers? Because you're not actually talking to God. You're talking to yourself more than God. There's a lot of you in it. See, to pray like Hezekiah, it needs trust in God. To trust that he knows your challenges, that he knows your heart, he knows your fears. That you know that he will keep his word. See, previous to this, in verse 7, Isaiah talked to King Hezekiah about the destruction that was going to happen to the king. And yet, it hadn't come yet. So in verse 7, it says, listen, when he hears a certain report that's talking about the king of Assyria, I will make him want to return to his own country, and then I'll have him cut down with the sword. Well, that didn't happen. By the second letter, the king was still alive. Guess what? It took 20 years for this prayer to be answered. By verse 37, it says, when he went back home, he got killed by his 2 sons with the sword. 20 years it took for this prayer to be answered. Sometimes the question we just have to ask ourselves is, will your faith last as long as your prayers? God's like, I know I'm going to answer your prayer, but will your faith be there when I decide to come? We remember Luke 18, 6-8 about the parable of never giving up on praying. It says, and the Lord said, listen to what the unjust judge says. And will not God bring about justice for his chosen ones, who cried out to him day and night? Will he not keep putting them off? I tell you, he will see that they get justice and quickly. However, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth? Man, when I come to actually answer your prayer, are you still going to believe in it? See, praying completely focused on God requires trust. 100%, where you just got to focus on God, not anybody else, but just God. And it's trusting in God. You know, I really do want to lift up my wife, Tegan. When we got asked to go to Samoa, I thought I was going to have a certain difficult conversation with her. But she was well ahead of the game. What I mean by that is when we got asked to go to New Zealand, Joe and Carrie, we trust them with our lives, right? We trust them with everything. They said 3 months. Jokes, we were there 3.5 years. So when Joe said, you're going to be in Samoa for a year, I was like, do the math. Yeah. You think this is my last sermon this is my last sermon, guys. I ain't coming back. But I remember driving home with Tegan, and I was like, I'm surrendered. We don't know what God's going to do. But I remember her just saying, and we weren't talking specifically about it, but she was like, you know, who knows how long we'll be there? I was like, she got it. Because that's 100% true. We do not know how long we're going there. But that's the idea. It's like, you got to get focused on God, not what somebody's calling us to. We're going there willing to die in Samoa. Eli's going to have a couple of tattoos when he returns. Like, you know, it's going to be awesome. We're not going there. We're trusting in God and what he's going to do. To completely focus on God, it requires trust. And sometimes it's like that, but it can be difficult as well. When it comes to our families, trusting in God. You know, I always have to say this. I owe my salvation to my mom, but she's not a Christian. Very different things. I owe my salvation to a lot of my family members, but they're not Christians. They taught me prayer. They taught me the importance of church. They taught me, you know, how to grow up and never give up on people and the love of God. But they're not Christians. See, if I stop focusing on God and I turn my focus onto others, it messes up my mind. My prayers will change. Instead of, God, what do you want to do with their lives? It's like, God, I can't see past this. See, we see here of why Hezekiah was able to get God's attention is because he completely focused on God. He humbled himself, and he never used the word I. My challenge for you is pay attention in your prayers. How much time are you talking about yourself? The next prayer, try to not use the word I or me. Just go completely focused on God and others. Trust that God knows what's going on in your heart. Point number 2, the miracles, they depend on important prayers. Important prayers. You may go, are there some prayers we pray that aren't important? Yes, very true. And we'll learn about that as we go. Verse 20, again, this is our theme scripture. So let's go back to why, again, this prayer was important. It says here, kind of in the middle of the verse, the Lord God of Israel says, because you have prayed to me, okay, you talk to me, you're not talking to yourself, about, why am I killing on this verse? Sennacherib, there we go. King of Assyria. I practiced it like 10 times before I got up here. But do we see what he said here, right? He says, because you prayed to me, about Sennacherib, king of Assyria. The subject of prayer is important. He didn't say you just prayed to me. What he prayed about was important to God. It wasn't that you just came to me and you had all these other issues that you needed to deal with, but you came and prayed about things that were important to God. God heard him not because he just prayed, because he prayed about this king. He prayed about things that really mattered to God. Has anyone ever came up to you and gave you a prayer request that you just really wanted to respond? I ain't praying for that. I know there are sisters that test this to the T. Hey, brother, I'm going to get a dress for the Christmas banquet. Can you please just pray that I find a great deal on one? What do I look like? God, I know you are the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. God, put it on the manager's heart, just a 10% discount, Father. I'm not praying that prayer, right? See, your prayers matter. And King Hezekiah, he could have prayed about anything, but he prayed about what was important to God. And so therefore, God was like, because you prayed to me about this specific thing, I've listened. Your prayers matter, so stop wasting them on trivial things. James 5, verse 16, the prayer of a righteous person is powerful and effective. Every righteous person has this type of prayer that can shape lives, so use it wisely. That your prayers can change people's lives. Learn to understand how to use this power. We see it and ridicule it all the time in the world, where we see somebody win the lottery and we go, man, this person can change so many people. And yet they get like a pool in their living room, right? Or like a slide out the front door. And we're like, man, they wasted all this. If only I had the money, I would do great things. You have more power than that person in your prayer. And yet we waste it on little things that don't mean anything to God. See, I'm tired of hearing disciples of Jesus ask for so simple and worldly things in prayer. I've made it a new conviction of mine after this lesson. I will not pray for your exams if you idolize uni. Ask me about, I won't do it. I will not indulge in your sin. My prayers are powerful, at least if I'm righteous that day. But I don't want to mess up your life by giving you into your idolatry. Yeah, I won't pray about your job if that's all you want to do. We have to make a decision what we're praying about because it matters. See, when you start focusing on God, you start focusing on what's important to pray about. And it shows a hardness of heart when you don't focus on what's important. You know, I know there's many times where we'll do a Bible study with somebody and, we'll get in some real deep issues and challenges or things that they need to change. And sometimes we'll go, hey, at the end of it, how about you pray? And they'll pray about, God, thank you for today. It's a beautiful day. Thank you for the trees. Amen. Like, what just happened the last 30 minutes? I think there's some deeper issues you need to pray about. I've 100% stopped and I'm like, bro, pray again. Like, we got some issues to pray about. I know there are sometimes even in the church, people will bring up an issue to one of the leaders, and the first question they'll ask, did you pray about it? No, go out and pray. Maybe they'll come back and like, did you pray about it? Yes. Well, nothing changed. Go pray again. Right? Maybe you didn't beg. Maybe you didn't talk about what's really going on in your heart. Go pray again. Why? Because we expect that righteous people have powerful and effective prayers. Expect something to move. See, sometimes we can commonly approach prayer with a frame of what's on our heart instead of praying about what's on God's heart. King Hezekiah didn't go, this is what I think and all this. It's like, God, this is what's going on, and I know this is what's important to you. Stop praying about the sentimentality concerning your family. Pray about holding God's standard. Very different. We all get sentimental. We all have people that we love. But God, what's important to him? That his standard doesn't get corrupted. You pray about the sentimentality, what's the best that can happen? That you lower the standard and so you feel good about yourself? That's just not going to help. You pray about God's standard and God would truly change their lives. Stop praying about what the future you want. Start praying that God's plans are easily accepted in your heart. Not what you want, but what God wants. Learn to pray about what really matters. Because think about it. If this king didn't pray this prayer, what would have happened? Thousands upon thousands of lives would have died. Thousands upon thousands. David was credited to killing of tens of thousands. But Hezekiah, in his effort, saw the death of 185,000 in one day. At the height of King David, he never did that. At the height of King David. And Hezekiah, how did he do that? Simply by one prayer. That's how powerful it is. Prayer is powerful. Pray like it. See, what miracle is waiting for you to pray about it? King Hezekiah saved thousands, the same as at risk today. 100%. Pray about the worldwide movement. Pray about your leaders. Pray about you staying saved and not desiring the world. Pray about what's really important in this world. Because I promise you, if any single one of us was now in Israel or on the Gaza Strip, what we think is important would radically change. Our prayers would change very quickly. If we put ourselves in a desperate situation, we go, what is really important? It's no less at risk today. There are people, there are lives that are depending on your prayers. See, when we look at it, we don't have the excuse to go, well, the miracles of the church is going to just be dependent on the leaders. And the leaders just looking at the people below them, well, it's going to be dependent on how quickly they rise up. No, it's dependent on you specifically, on your prayers. And yes, you're going to have to humble yourself. You're going to have to get yourself out of the way and go, God, what's important to you? Get myself out of the way. In conclusion, the title of the lesson was, The Miracles Depend on Your Prayer Life. The reason your heart hasn't changed is because others have prayed for you and you haven't prayed for you. You go and pour your heart in front of God and go, there's just a blockage right now. I know I should be making the next step, but there's a hardness of heart in my heart. You prayed through that. Point number one is it's going to be dependent on God-focused prayers. That you pray just totally focused on God and not yourself. Point number two is pray important prayers. Stop getting distracted by all these little things and go to God what's extremely important. And when you do so, you'll start to see miracles in your life, and you don't just go around and looking at, well, it's because of this person, this. You can have the confidence and go, it's not just because of me, because it's because of God, but he is a God who listens to prayers. Thank you very much.